stone. Hey, 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 bullshit stone.
Okay, so FDM printed base. Pretty large seams. I'm not worried too much about that piece though, because it's pretty much all going to be hidden except for the sides. So the seams were fairly easy to deal with, except for where it ran into some of the finer detail, but really wasn't too visible. The cliff rock is also FDM printed, and I had some problems where my Sovo SV08 just didn't want to finish the print. So I had to pick the print back up off from where it failed, and I had to glue the pieces together, so making even more seams for me. But I didn't want to waste all that filament and try again and probably end up with the same result of another failed print. So that's the magic I worked. Them were the only parts of the diorama that were FDM printed. Was the very bottom of the base and the cliff rock. I'm going to use the UV resin to fill in the seams, and I'm going to come in with paper towel to wipe up any excess before curing it, so that the details don't get muddied up by curing extra UV resin that may have flowed onto it. I'm going to use a sepia ink to spray the base. To spray a base color for the base. Just start off with the darkest brown that I have in my arsenal, and then I'm going to come in and start dry brushing. Not how I would say dry brushing, it's not really dry brushing, it's in between a wet brush and a dry brush. Anyways, I'm going to start picking up the edges more fully with a just regular brown color, and then after the brown, after I'm satisfied with that brown coverage, I'm going to come back in with a deck tan and actually dry brush this time, and only catch the highest of the edges to give it an even more wooden look. I was kind of aiming for an old worn out piece of furniture that you might see in your grandparents' house was my idea. You know, so something vintage from back in like the 60s that's been around forever. And then I will seal what work I got done on that base with a satin clear coat. I don't want it too shiny, and I was thinking of going matte, but yeah, satin. So starting with the cliff rock, I am going to use a goblin green, thinned down, pretty much to a ratio of 1 drop of green to probably 5-6 drops of thinner, and I'm going to spray that into all the nooks and crannies. After I'm pleased with what I have there, I'm going to move on to a dry brush of 3 shades of gray. I'm going to start off with a dark base gray, of course, a lighter gray for my mid-tone, and a lighter for my highs. And I'm just going to try to catch all the edges as I start to go up lighter. So as I'm going and putting my base gray down, I'm trying to cover up a good bit of that green, still let a little bit of it shine through. When I move on to my mid-tone gray, I'm going to be pressing the brush down less on the model, and once I get into my lightest gray, that is just barely going to be skimming across the model so that I can, you know, just make it look more like rocks. I mean, just putting down one gray is not going to cut it to make it look like a rock, right? Now I'm going to take an olive green and I'm going to take a brown, and I'm going to water them down, turn them into a wash, and I'm going to use that across all the cracks along the top of the rock, make it look like mud and moss build up over time. So anywhere rock is found on this diorama, I use the same process of using the 3 shades of gray, working from the dark up to the light. And when you're finishing with the light, you're going to be using it sparingly as a dry brush just to catch the highest of edges. Weathering the rocks around the treasure with the same green and brown, and sopping up with a paper towel anything that I feel is too much. Under low airbrush pressure, I'm going to use true brass for a base for all the treasure, and then I'm going to highlight that with a gold. I am going to be using Vallejo Model Air Silver for all of the silver parts on this diorama. I appreciate this paint for its nice smooth consistency going down, where you don't see the particles in it. Yeah, just a really good paint. Just a simple layer of Vallejo bone white for the skeleton. Anything that was wood on the diorama, I just used a standard brown. The rug I painted with a crimson red, and I would be using deck tan on the pearl strands and the tassels of the rug. Using Vallejo Model Air Silver again, I'm going to paint all of this chalice. And then before constructing the base, I'm going to go over multiple things like the skeleton and give that a wasteland brown glaze and touch up the red carpet with some red highlights. Light for the high areas, dark for the recessed areas, and blend in between. And I just couldn't get that to happen. I went multiple times over this banner with different variations of brown to try to get the effect right, and I wasn't happy. It probably took me about 3 times till I was happy with this effect. What I found that I'm going to try to use next time if it ever comes across is I got to remember just to be confident in what I'm doing, and the blending of the in-between values. Using some good old saran wrap, I'm going to protect the banner from the skull and spray the skull down airbrush style with some Vallejo bone white. Then follow that up with Vallejo wasteland brown to tint the bone white. Silver, 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 painting more silver, paint all the handles of the sword silver, and the blades of course. And then I will be putting a rust effect on that to dirty it up. Now for all the intricate parts on the skull, I'm going to go in with a very fine brush and use the Vallejo silver again. And I am going to take my time because these are some very fine detailed parts. Then I am going to paint the beads with a blue and red. I may have had a third color, but I can't remember anymore. The bandana was painted with golden acrylics, primary red. I had to cover up a more translucent red that just wasn't working. And here is the rust effect. Just a bottle of cheap old folk art, and I used a junky brush that would stipple real well, and that's what I did here. Using gloss black, can't remember what brand, it's just any old gloss black that I have, and just using the side of my brush to catch the top of the letters. Painting Jack the Monkey. Has quite a few colors in it that I'm going to list off here. His suit was painted with, let me pronounce this, quinacridone red. His sleeves were painted in deck tan. The pistol handle was painted with Van Dyke brown. The barrel I painted with Vallejo Air Silver. His flesh tone for his face I used as the base, basic skin tone, and the highlights was done with pale flesh. The gold around the rims of his outfit was done in yellow orc, and his fur was based with Van Dyke brown, lightly highlighted with a basic brown, and then I came in with deck tan to add in all the aged white strands of hair. I didn't realize just how long it took to paint Jack the Monkey until sitting here going through editing the footage, and wow, it took me like 4 hours to paint this little guy. So, getting into painting this dead hanging pirate, after a lot of looking at the pictures I have downloaded from the internet, reference pictures, that's the word, I decided that I was going to throw a base of some Liquitex brown, just any regular old standard brown, and then I came over top of that with a kind of wettish dry brush, not really a dry brush, and I went over the body and I made sure not to get it down the crevices because I wanted some of that grungy brown left down there. And after that, I came over with a light gray, like a dolphin gray, I do believe it was called, and I dry brushed that across the rest of the body. The rags that are draped over the dead pirate's body, it's two separate pieces when you see the movie or you look at the reference pictures. And for the lighter color, the grayish color, I went with a light gray for a base, and it was really hard. There's no defining regions between the top layer and the bottom layer of the clothes, so I just had to do my best to pick that out. So putting down the light gray, and then I will go over that and more watered down, and I will use a unbleached titanium, pretty much like a glaze or a wash over top of that light gray. Painting the second layer of the corpse's clothes was a base of it was a sand, brown sand, I do believe, and then I came back over top of that with a glaze of yellow orc, or it was gold orc, yellow or gold orc, one of the other of them. The boots were as simple as a common brown, and then I come back later on and I stipple that with a bone white to give it a weathered look. So the lobster claw with my reference pictures, and I shouldn't have done it, trying to go with a genuine looking crab claw, and I'm just so unhappy with the way it looks. But basically I was wet blending in between a pyro red, pyro orange, unbleached titanium cream color. Just take it for what it looks like. I hate it. All the little seashells and barnacles that are on his skull were pretty enjoyable to paint. I just took my time with a fine tip brush, using unbleached titanium to base everything with outline it, and then I came back with Wasteland Brown, which is a contrast color by Vallejo. Hit some of the shells with that, and then the barnacle color looking ones I used a rosy flesh, watered down to color them ones up. Keeping the beams that the pirate is hanging from with the old weathered lumber look, I just went with the black base and I used a desert sand brown, and after that I dry brushed a light gray across the top of that, trying to keep it weathered looking. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to use unbleached titanium on all the ropes on the beams, and then I will come back on top of that with the Wasteland Brown, lightly watered down, so it'll be extra runny, run into all the little twists and turns of the rope and give it more contrast. Looking back on the footage of the model now, that claw, I really should have just kept it the same color as the rest of the body in the gray scale. Something I'll probably end up fixing in the future though. It just don't set with me right. So this is a piece of the black pearl, and as we know, the black pearl is a brown chip with heavy coats of oil, black oil, all over it to make it seaworthy, keep it watertight. I went a little too heavy with the brown, and I didn't notice that until getting the model together, which is something I need to rectify later in the future. But as it is right now, I just used a brown over that and dry brushed it on over top of the black base that was already there as a primer. The inks I use for the lamp is all going to be Liquitex. I'm going to use white, red, and yellow. I'm going to paint the bottom window all the way around white. The second window up is going to be yellow. All the rest is going to be red. Then I'm going to come back to the yellow, intrude into the red panels just above. And then I'm going to paint the remaining top windows black, but still leaving some of the red. And then I will use Van Dyke Brown to paint the frame top and bottom with. Finally moving on to the figures of the diorama, and choosing the color for Barbossa and Jack's outfit was kind of tricky in the sense that what you see in the movie is not necessarily what they're actually wearing in behind the scene footage. Their costumes have more blue in them. When you watch a movie, it's more of a black or a gray depending on the light. So I kind of went in between everything that I was seeing and I see on the movie and decided with a gray asphalt and added a iridescent blue ink into that. And this is what I ended up with. Another blunder I made doing this is I decided it'd be okay to paint things before fitting the figures together and fixing the seams. So I will have to go back over my work I already did after doing these seams, and voila, my brain at work, woo! And nothing special here, I just used dark gray for Barbossa's pants. Camera ate the footage for painting Barbossa's vest red, but it did get me trying to catch the upper detail with a small dry brush and golden orc. Yellow orc for the handkerchief hanging around his waist, down his leg, and yeah, just some yellow orc, my man. Alright, so on to the skin tones. I learned a lot from my mistakes I made on this model, and there was a lot of mistakes made. So let me start off with saying I do thin my paints, especially my skin tones. My skin tones, I'm usually thinning 1 drop paint to about 5 drops of thinner. So I used a heavy skin tone as a base for all, and then I followed that up with a highlight of tan skin tone, and it just made things ridiculously dark. So I decided to still work with that. So then I wash it with the yellow, and I seal it, and things are getting out of control looking. So I decide that I'm going to try to highlight with a elvish skin tone, and it started to bring it back up some, but it was still too yellow. So after sealing, I decided to try to give it a red wash, and it started to bring a little more life back to it, but it was very red looking. But I was just trying to trust the process, and so I just decided to move on to a I forget what it was, like a flat flesh tone, I do believe, was my first highlight. and then I moved up to a pale flesh tone after that. That was the last highlight of a skin tone that I used around the cheeks, the bridge of the forehead, the bridge of the nose, the cheeks. I probably said cheeks already. Anyways, it was just bad. It was a nightmare. I used Tamiya Color X32 titanium silver on the pistol in his belt there. I used bone black from Golden Acrylic to do the waist belt and the shoulder belt on Barbosa. Now very carefully with a fine tip brush and deck tan, I outline his undershirt and then fill it in. I wanted to try to get a variation in the silvers, so I used the Vallejo Air silver for the buttons on his jacket, and then I used the X32, like I said, coming up here on his buckles. Gold for the chain around his neck, and Vallejo silver for the pendant, Vallejo gold also. Keeping the boots nice and simple with Van Dyke Brown. Here I'm using deck tan again to catch the undershirt showing through his jacket. You gotta take your time trying to get in between all them fingers and not mess up your flesh tone. The gloss black for the handle, and the Vallejo gold for the trim around the finger protecting guard thing, and Vallejo silver for the blade. So doing Barbosa's hair was as easy as a orange brown base. I came in with a heavy highlight of normal brown, and then I came with highlights of deck tan to give it aged white hair, and then after that I made up a wash of black to get into all the crevices of his hair to bring hair back darker and get into the recesses and darken it all up, just trying to dirty his hair up and make it look gold. For his eyes, I just used some of that iridescent blue and then dotted it with a gloss black in the center. So here we are at the end of the diorama. I am cutting this short. If you want to see Jack painted, I can do that in a separate video. This is taking just way too long. All the separate details in this diorama was way more. This was a bigger job than I expected it to be. I bit off more than I can chew. So for now on, I am going to do less of a model, not such a grand scale model. But Jack is painted in the same fashion as Barbosa. You see all the similar colors there. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I really want to make a channel, make a go of this. I need your help. If you could please subscribe or give a like, I would really like to see where we could take this. Thank you for watching.